No one in their right mind would have followed those dogs. Not in that part of Detroit. Not in that hour of night. They moved like ghosts, 5 German shepherds slipping through chain-link fences and over crumbling sidewalks with the kind of precision that made Maggie Reynolds' skin crawl. This wasn't how strays behaved. Strays didn't move in formation. Strays didn't dig at the exact same patch of dirt for 7 nights in a row. From behind a rusted dumpster behind the old Riverdale textile plant, Maggie steadied her breath and lifted her night vision binoculars. They were at it again. Dirt, flying in neat arcs, paws moving fast, furious, intentional. The biggest one, a grey-muzzled alpha she'd taken to calling Atlas, didn't dig. He sat sentinel, ears twitching, golden eyes fixed like a sniper's scope until suddenly those eyes locked onto hers. Maggie froze. She was 48, divorced, former bookkeeper, part-time shelter volunteer, not exactly FBI material, and yet, in that moment, she could feel her heart pounding like a fugitive's because that dog wasn't looking in her direction. He was looking at her, through the dark, through the silence, as if to say, "You've seen enough. Now help." 3 weeks earlier, the dogs had shown up at the Second Chance Animal Shelter on the city's east side. Maggie hadn't thought much of it at first, just another call from Detroit PD about animals left behind. But these weren't ordinary dogs. They hadn't been abandoned in a park or found rummaging through garbage. They were discovered standing silently around a dead man. "Strangest call of my career," Officer Daniels had muttered, helping unload the dogs from the back of the cruiser. Guy was dead for days, but the dogs, they weren't malnourished, weren't panicked. Looked like they'd been feeding themselves out of his pantry, but they would not leave the body. From the moment they arrived, the staff noticed something was off. Not in a bad way, just unsettling. These 5 shepherds moved like a unit. They responded to subtle hand cues. They watched humans the way seasoned soldiers read terrain. It was Tyler, the 19-year-old shelter assistant, who gave them their nickname. "They're the commandos," he'd said. "I've got video. One distracts, another opens the gate. I swear, they almost made me salute." Maggie had laughed at the time, but she wasn't laughing anymore. Second Chance was a place built out of stubborn love. A former warehouse turned kennel, concrete floors echoing with barks, chain-link walls dividing the hopeful from the forgotten. It sat on the fringe of a Detroit that didn't make postcards any more. Boarded storefronts, overgrown lots, and broken streetlights. But still, it stood. Like Maggie, she hadn't planned to stay this long. A temporary volunteer gig after her divorce became a full-blown mission after her son left for college. She'd grown up in a military family, father, 2 brothers, all Army. Maybe that's why she connected so deeply with structure, with loyalty, with creatures that understood unspoken codes. And these dogs, they understood everything, especially Atlas. He wasn't the biggest, that was Titan, or the most curious, that was Hunter. But he commanded the group. If Atlas sat, they sat. If Atlas growled, they froze. If Atlas barked, they moved. It wasn't until the 3rd escape that Maggie started watching them after hours. The shelter gates were secured, locks checked, fences intact. But somehow, every few nights, all 5 dogs would disappear for exactly 2 hours. Then return, dirty, panting, and exhausted, but never hurt, never wandering. She'd followed them once. They'd slipped through a broken fence behind the abandoned Riverdale plant, moving toward a vacant lot thick with weeds. That's when the digging started. Always the same spot, always with purpose. Tonight was different. Tonight, Maggie had seen it with her own eyes. Something metal gleaming beneath the dirt, and for the first time, the dogs looked like they'd uncovered a target. "God help me," she whispered, inching forward. That's when Atlas rose and padded toward her, slowly, deliberately. 10 feet away, he stopped, barked one slow and commanding, and turned to look over his shoulder, toward the hole they'd dug. An invitation. A challenge. A test. She didn't hesitate. Maggie knelt by the hole, brushing loose dirt away with her hands. The hatch was old, industrial, maybe from the factory's maintenance days. There was a rusted handle near the edge, too stubborn to budge. With her grip alone, Titan moved beside her. Without hesitation, he gripped the handle in his massive jaws. Together, they pulled. With a painful metallic shriek, the hatch opened, and what came out was not air. It was the smell rank sour, heavy with sickness, and something human. And beneath it all, a cough. Oh my God. Maggie whispered. She grabbed her phone, flicked on the flashlight, and shone it into the darkness. A rusted ladder descended into what looked like an old storm shelter. The air shimmered with dampness. Then came a second cough, and then a voice barely more than a breath. Help. If you're as drawn in as I was the first time I followed those dogs, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Brave Animals. These are the stories the world needs to hear, stories of loyalty, sacrifice, and the incredible bond between animals and humans. Maggie should have called 911. She should have stayed topside, kept her distance, waited for help. Instead, she began to climb. Each rung groaned under her weight. The air grew heavier. Her flashlight flickered against concrete walls stained with time and rust. At the bottom, she turned and froze. The room was maybe 12 feet square. Tattered blankets lined a makeshift bed, empty water bottles, food wrappers, a single plastic crate used as a table. And lying on the blankets, a man, gaunt, hollow-eyed, covered in filth and fever sweat, and surrounding him like a protective ring were the 5 shepherds. Atlas sat at his head, Titan at his side. Storm and Hunter watched the corners. Gentle Sage lay across his chest, her muzzle rising and falling with his shallow breaths. The man blinked against Maggie's light. They found you, he rasped. My team. They never stopped. Maggie's hand shook as she dialed 911. There's a man, she told the dispatcher. Barely containing her voice, beneath the old Riverdale textile plant. He's alive, barely, and he's not alone. The Detroit EMTs arrived fast. By the time the first responders climbed down the rusted ladder into the underground room, Maggie had already cleared a path and laid a blanket over the gaunt man's chest. The dogs hadn't moved far. They watched every movement of the medics, each shepherd rising one by one, not in aggression, but alertness. Silent, calculating. These dogs belonged to him. The lead paramedic asked as he adjusted the oxygen mask over the man's cracked lips. Yes, Maggie said, kneeling beside them. They found me, led me here. One of the younger EMTs looked up from his monitor. You're telling us the dogs broke out of a shelter and tracked down their owner? I'm telling you, Maggie replied, her voice shaking. They've been keeping him alive for who knows how long. The man tried to sit up, but collapsed back. His hand trembled as he reached out to the nearest dog, Atlas, the grey-muzzled sentinel who had never left his post. Good boy, the man whispered through the mask. Told you, never leave a man behind. Took 4 paramedics and a rope hand harness rig to lift the stretcher out of the pit. As the man's fragile body was hoisted up, the dogs began to whine soft, low sounds that vibrated in Maggie's chest. They tried to follow, but the ladder was crowded. Hang tight, she said gently, placing a steadying hand on Storm's broad shoulder. We're going up next. Once above ground, the shepherds formed a tight circle around the stretcher. Atlas pressed against the gurney's side, refusing to leave even as the ambulance doors opened. He can't take all the dogs, one of the medics warned. There's no room. He'll panic without them, Maggie said. You take him. I'll take them. The medic hesitated, then nodded. Follow us to Sinai Grace. I see you's ready. The ambulance pulled away, sirens slicing through the cold Detroit night. Maggie climbed into her pickup with all 5 dogs, who piled into the truck bed and back seat with the precision of a seasoned unit. She had no idea what was waiting at the hospital, but deep down, she understood one thing. These dogs weren't just looking for their owner, they were executing a mission. 3 hours later, in a sterile hospital hallway, Maggie sat beside a vending machine, nursing bad coffee and worse nerves. Frank Williams, the grizzled director of Second Chance Animal Shelter, paced in front of her. He wore his usual canvas vest and heavy boots, as if still preparing to fix a leaky pipe or rescue a dog at a moment's notice. You're saying they escaped again to go find a man under a factory? he muttered. Maggie nodded, her voice low, and brought him food, water, blankets. We're talking weeks of survival, coordination, purpose. Frank scratched his bald head. That's not behavior. That's training, professional training. Military, she said quietly. You think the guy's former army or something like it? Before Frank could respond, a young nurse appeared in the hallway, clipboard in hand. He's stable, she said. Still weak, but conscious. Name, Maggie asked. James Walker. That ring any bells? Maggie and Frank exchanged a glance. Nothing yet. But something told her this man's past was going to matter a lot more than anyone realized. Room 312 was dim and quiet. The steady beep of heart monitors like a metronome, keeping time with fragile breaths. James Walker looked better cleaned up, but only barely. His skin was stretched thin over sharp cheekbones. His hair was matted, beard unkempt. But when Atlas entered, his body visibly relaxed. The dog approached the bedside and gently laid his chin on the edge of the blanket. Hey, partner, James murmured, his voice raspier than before. Didn't think you'd find me again. Maggie waited at the door, not wanting to intrude. Come in, James said, waving her forward. I owe you. You owe your dogs, she corrected with a smile. Always do. She pulled up a chair. I'm Maggie Reynolds. I volunteer at the shelter where your dogs were staying. James gave a slow nod. Thought I recognized the smell of antiseptic and kibble. How long were you down there? For months, maybe more. Alone. He gave a slight shake of his head. Not alone, I had them. James sipped water slowly while Maggie listened. He started from the beginning, or at least the beginning of the end. I served in the 75th Ranger Regiment, he said. 3 tours, Afghanistan. My third one didn't end well. IED took out our Humvee, lost half my unit, spent 6 months in recovery. Came home with shrapnel in my back and a head full of ghosts. He paused, staring out the hospital window as snow fell beyond the glass. They gave me meds, therapy. None of it helped. Couldn't sleep, couldn't be around people, jumped at every sound. What changed? Maggie asked gently. They gave me Atlas. He smiled, then soft and fragile, like a man remembering the first time he'd breathed air after nearly drowning. Service dog pilot program, PTSD support. The first night I had him, I slept 5 hours straight. First time in years, he looked down at the dog beside him. He knew. When I was about to panic, when the dreams hit, he'd nudge me, sit against my legs, ground me, and the others. I started working with them. Titan for physical support. Storm for resource retrieval. Hunter tracks scent. Sage. He paused again. Sage has a gift. She can feel when someone's slipping emotionally. She's intuitive. The silence in the room stretched, broken only by the beep of monitors and the occasional whir of machines. I had them all, James continued. But the program got cut. Budget reasons, they said. Therapy dogs aren't cheap. They chose pills. Over pause, he gave a dry laugh. I tried to keep it going, kept them with me. But I lost my housing. Ran out of money. Eventually, I made a deal. What kind of deal? Maggie asked. Man named Phillips. Said he had land. Wanted trained shepherds for security. Offered me $5,000 for the 4 younger dogs. I kept Atlas. Couldn't function without him. Maggie felt her stomach twist, and he lied, she said. James nodded, his eyes darkening. Found out too late. Tried to get them back. Then I got sick. He looked at her with quiet pain. I thought I was dying. Then, one night, I heard digging. Claws scraping. A metal clang, and a familiar bark. His voice caught. They found me. Outside the room, Maggie leaned against the hallway wall, tears welling as the weight of James's story settled in. The image of those dogs digging through frozen dirt, organizing nightly escapes, dodging security. To bring their handler food and water. They weren't just pets. They were a pack, a mission, a miracle. She turned toward the elevator when her phone buzzed. Tyler, the shelter assistant. You seeing the news? Maggie frowned and tapped the link. A local station was running a headline. Veteran found alive in underground factory with 5 dogs. Photos flashed across the screen. James on the stretcher. The shepherds forming a protective circle around him. The city had just found its next viral story. That evening, Maggie returned home with 5 German shepherds in tow. Her backyard was small, her house even smaller. But they didn't care. They moved like a unit titan patrolling the perimeter, Storm sniffing along the fence. Sage sitting near the porch as if watching for emotional storms. She stood in the doorway, coffee in hand, and watched them settle into formation. Something about them made her feel safer, not just physically, emotionally, like whatever burden she was carrying, they'd already volunteered to share it. Her phone buzzed again. This time, Dr. Eleanor Barnes, Chief of Psychiatric Services at the Detroit VA. I heard about James. I worked with him during the therapy program. He was our best handler. If you're available, I'd like to speak with you and see the dogs. Maggie glanced back at the shepherds curled up on her porch. Sure, she replied. But be warned, these dogs aren't just loyal, they've got a plan. Maggie Reynolds never imagined her small Detroit bungalow would become a war room. The living room had been cleared of furniture. Dog beds and blankets covered every inch of the hardwood floor. A folding table held stacks of papers, intake records, military discharge forms, veterinary reports, and, at the center of it all, sat Atlas. Upright and alert, like a 4-legged general overseeing his operation. It had only been 48 hours since James Walker had been pulled out of that underground room, but Maggie already felt like she was living inside someone else's life. The house, once quiet and still, now pulsed with the low thumps of wagging tails and the soft breathing of dogs. Too intelligent to pretend this was just a normal week, she was reading over the intake documents again when her phone buzzed. Caller ID, Frank Williams. Hey, she answered. What's up? You better come down here, Frank said. His voice was tight, like a man clenching his jaw. We've got company. County Animal Control just showed up. What? Maggie's heart skipped. Why, someone made a report. Said the shepherds are former fighting dogs with behavioral risks. They've got a court order for assessment. Maggie stood frozen for a full second. They're victims, not fighters, she said. They didn't attack anyone. They rescued a man. You'll need to tell that to the 2 uniforms currently eyeing their cages like they're bomb sniffers. I'm on my way. She hung up, whistled for the dogs, and grabbed her coat. Frank met her at the front gates of Second Chance. He looked every bit his 63 years in that moment, his posture stiff, arms crossed. A weariness deep in his eyes. Behind him, 2 county animal control officers stood beside a white van. One was scanning the empty kennels. The other was already filling out paperwork on a clipboard. We have reason to believe the shepherds may have been involved in organized dogfighting, the taller officer said. His tone was practiced, under City Ordinance, the 13th of February 14, any animal suspected of such history must undergo evaluation. Maggie stepped between them and the gate. They were victims. They've got defensive wounds. They were found in a man's apartment, yes, but they weren't fighting. They were guarding a body. Then they broke out, found their handler, and saved his life. The officer didn't blink. We still need to take custody for behavioral testing. No, Maggie said flatly. Absolutely not. These dogs are working animals. They're trapping. They're also unlicensed, unregistered, and technically property of the shelter. The other officer replied, and under county authority, we're well within legal rights. Frank stepped in. We're not handing them over. That's when the taller officer pulled out the paperwork. Court order, he said. Signed this morning. You can either cooperate, or we do this the hard way with police backup. Maggie stared at the paper, pulse pounding. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was strategic, intentional. Someone wanted the dogs out of the way, and she had a good guess. Who Dr. Eleanor Barnes arrived just after the dogs were loaded into the van. Her tailored coat flapped behind her as she marched toward the gate. Heels clicking like a countdown. They took them, she asked, glancing at the retreating vehicle. Maggie nodded, chest tight. All 5, who reported them, no name listed, just concerned citizen. The doctor's lips thinned. Let me guess, Councilman Thompson suddenly pulling support for the therapy program. Frank grunted. He backed out yesterday, said he needed more assurances before committing city property. This is retaliation, Barnes muttered. We're close to rebuilding the VA therapy dog program, and someone's trying to burn the blueprints. Maggie looked up. Then we fight back. That night, back at the hospital, James lay in bed with his arms crossed and jaw clenched. His face, though no longer ghostly pale, looked hollow again, like the man Maggie had first found underground. They took them? He asked quietly. There at the county assessment facility, Maggie replied, pulling up a chair beside his bed. Standard evaluation protocol. Isolation, observation, stress tests. His eyes snapped to hers. They're splitting them up. Yes, they'll break. Maggie hesitated. I know. James sat up straighter, wincing as his ribs protested. They're not kennel dogs. They're not pets. They're specialists. They operate as a unit. I'm going to fix it, she said. No, James replied firmly. We are. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed. You're not medically cleared. I'm not staying in this bed while they sit in cages wondering why I'm not coming for them. Maggie didn't argue. She simply handed him his coat. The next morning, Maggie, James, and Dr. Barnes sat across from the director of the county facility, a gray-suited bureaucrat named Lyle Herman, whose voice never rose above a measured drawl, asking me to reverse an evaluation order based on personal testimony. He said, sipping from a world's best dad mug. No, Maggie said. We're showing you video evidence of their training. Documentation from the original therapy program. Military records, VA endorsements. James pushed a flash drive across the desk. I trained them, he said. My name is on every record. My unit worked with the VA to develop their behavioral protocols. According to your public discharge, you left the military under a PTSD-related medical order, Herman said, glancing down at a file. There are questions. That's exactly why these dogs were developed, Dr. Barnes cut in. To help veterans like James. The only thing unusual about this case is that the dogs acted better than most people would. Herman tapped a pen. We'll review the footage. But if the dogs show aggression during testing, they won't, James said. Unless you provoke them. And even then, they'll protect without attacking. That's what they were trained for. The meeting ended with no promises, but James's eyes didn't show fear. Only resolve. By Friday, news of the shepherd's seizure had spread. Local reporters gathered outside the shelter. Veterans groups began posting on social media. One tweet, "They saved their soldier, now who's saving them?" went viral, accumulating thousands of retweets within hours. Dr. Barnes scheduled a press conference for Monday. Maggie, meanwhile, was focused on keeping James afloat. Without the dogs, his progress was slipping. He slept less, ate little. The shadows under his eyes were back. I should never have sold them, he muttered one night on Maggie's couch. You were trying to survive, she reminded him, but I handed them to a man who locked them in a room and probably tried to turn them into fighters. That's not survival. That's betrayal. Maggie said nothing. Sometimes guilt didn't need a reply, just someone sitting beside it. The night before the evaluation results were due, Tyler burst into Maggie's house holding a tablet. Got something, he said, face flushed. Big. James looked up. What kind of big? Tyler set the tablet on the kitchen table. Financial records. Councilman Thompson's family investment, firm Thompson Holdings, LLC, made capital contributions to a shell company connected to Richard Phillips. The guy who bought my dogs, James said. Exactly, Tyler nodded. Phillips didn't just run a backyard kennel. He was part of a regional dogfighting ring, and Thompson's money helped fund it. Maggie sat slowly. That's why Thompson turned on the therapy program. If your dogs became public symbols, the media might connect them to Phillips and, through Phillips, to him. James stared at the screen. He tried to erase them. Not just them, Tyler said. You too. Maggie's hands trembled. This changes everything. The next morning, James stood outside the county facility, flanked by Maggie, Frank, Dr. Barnes, and half a dozen veterans who had come to support him. News vans rolled in. Protesters held signs reading "Therapy, not euthanasia," and "Honor our heroes all species." When Lyle Herman finally emerged with a clipboard in hand, the crowd fell silent. "We've completed behavioral assessments," he announced. "Atlas, Storm, and Hunter have passed and are eligible for release. What about Titan and Sage?" Maggie asked. Herman looked at James. Titan showed signs of protectiveness bordering on aggression. Sage displayed signs of emotional withdrawal. "We can't certify them." Maggie stepped forward. "So what happens now?" "They'll be held for 72 hours pending appeal. After that, euthanasia procedures may begin." James didn't flinch. His eyes locked with Maggie's. "Then we make our move now." Snow fell in soft flurries across Detroit's east side, blanketing rooftops and alleyways like a silencer on a gun. The city slept, but inside a cramped bungalow lit only by lamplight and tension, 4 people were wide awake, planning something they couldn't afford to get wrong. "They moved the timeline," Frank said, placing a printed document on Maggie's kitchen table. "Titan and Sage are scheduled for euthanasia at 9 a.m. tomorrow." James stared at the paper, fists clenched. Sage his gentlest dog, Titan his protector, both being marched toward death, not because they failed, but because they'd been misunderstood, labeled, and politicized. "This was the plan all along," Maggie said, pacing. "Thompson didn't want the dogs evaluated. He wanted them gone. Removed from the public eye before they could expose him." "He's accelerating everything," Tyler added, spinning his laptop toward them. "Look, City Council issued a new safety and welfare memo this morning. Emergency clause invoked. It lets animal control override the appeal period on public concern grounds. Guess who pushed it through?" James didn't need to look. "Thompson," Frank exhaled. "Slowly, we're out of legal options." "Then we do what the dogs would do," James said, voice calm, but iron-hard. "We go in. We get them out." Everyone turned toward him. "That's felony-level illegal," Maggie said. James didn't blink. "So was letting me rot in a hole beneath a factory. So was funding a dogfighting ring. This isn't about breaking the law. It's about breaking their game." At 2:10 a.m., the Second Chance truck rolled to a stop, 2 blocks from the Wayne County Animal Assessment Facility. Maggie sat behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel like it might float away. In the passenger seat, James adjusted a worn military cap, his old Ranger insignia still stitched on the front. "You sure you're ready for this?" she asked. "I was born for this," he replied. In the back seat, Tyler reviewed the system override plan on his tablet. His fingers hovered over the screen like a gamer waiting to drop into the final boss fight. "I've disabled the parking lot cameras for 14 minutes, he said. "I looped last night's footage. Won't hold forever. But it'll get us inside." Frank's voice came through the radio. "North corridor motion sensors are down. I'm cutting locks at the utility door now." Maggie nodded once, heart hammering. "Let's move." They slipped through the side entrance in silence. No alarms, no lights. The hallway smelled of bleach and old despair. Doors lined either side, holding cats, injured strays, and dogs deemed too aggressive to be adopted. At the end of the corridor, 5 cages sat in isolation, the dogs who'd been too loyal, too smart, too different. James moved first. When Atlas saw him, the shepherd let out a deep, trembling whine and stood tall, eyes glowing with restrained emotion. Storm followed with a soft bark. Hunter wagged his tail just once, then stood perfectly still, eyes scanning the hallway, and then Titan and Sage. Sage remained curled in the far corner, trembling. She hadn't moved for days. Titan stood in front of her like a living wall. "I've got you," James whispered, voice thick. Maggie worked the lock. The gate swung open. James stepped into the pen and dropped to one knee. "They came," he whispered, touching Titan's shoulder, then gently coaxing Sage out of the corner. "They always come." By 2:37 a.m., the dogs were loaded in the van, tails low but wagging. No barking, no confusion, just silent, dignified relief. Frank's voice crackled through the earpiece. "You've got about 6 minutes before their systems catch up. Get moving." As they turned onto the street, the shelter van disappeared into the snow. By dawn, every major news outlet in Detroit had one story: midnight break-in saves dogs from death row veterans pack missing after. Secret Extraction Councilman Robert Thompson wasn't smiling. He stood in front of a line of microphones, flanked by animal control officers and a newly appointed city attorney. "This kind of vigilante behavior cannot be tolerated," he said, his practiced voice dripping with concern. "We cannot allow emotions to override law and order." When asked whether he had financial ties to Richard Phillips, he dismissed it as absurd internet conspiracy. But that same morning, a veterans group called Shepherd Strong released a video. In it, James Walker sat in Maggie's backyard, surrounded by all 5 of his dogs. He didn't speak with drama. He didn't raise his voice. He told the story. From the PTSD diagnosis to the therapy program. From losing his home to trusting the wrong man. From his dog's miraculous return to his discovery in the underground chamber. And finally, what they'd all learned, that Councilman Thompson's family had invested in a shell company funding dog fighting operations. Tyler had the receipts. Frank vouched for the training. Dr. Barnes backed it with medical documentation. And when James turned to the camera and said, "These dogs saved my life. Now it's time we save theirs," the video hit 2 million views in under 48 hours. The public backlash was swift and relentless. Animal rights groups flooded City Hall with petitions. Veterans associations held rallies. A GoFundMe to support a new facility for James's dogs passed $250,000 by the end of the week. Councilman Thompson issued a statement calling the accusations politically motivated. But within 3 days, he announced his resignation, citing personal reasons. The euthanasia order was rescinded, and the city was left to ask a painful question. How did we come so close to killing the very animals that taught us what loyalty means? 3 weeks later, Maggie stood beside James in front of a weathered brick building on Jefferson Avenue. The old warehouse had been abandoned for over a decade. Now, it bore a new sign: Second Chance, Veterans and Canine Rehabilitation, CNT. Looked down at Atlas, who sat at his side, eyes scanning the horizon like he was still on duty. "They ready?" Maggie asked. "They've always been ready," James said. Inside, volunteers swept the freshly painted floors. Training equipment had been delivered the night before. The converted kennels were warm and open, designed not to contain but to comfort. The dogs would live here, train here, and eventually new ones would be added. Rescues, veterans, survivors, all getting a second chance. If this story moved you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to join the brave animals community. These aren't just tales, they're testaments to love, loyalty, and the heroes who walk on 4 legs. Later that afternoon, as James led a tour for VA officials, Maggie slipped outside for a moment of quiet. The sun had melted most of the snow, leaving puddles glinting like glass across the sidewalk. Atlas stepped beside her. "You never quit," she said softly, resting a hand on his head. Even when the world did, the shepherd leaned into her hand. Behind them, laughter echoed from the training yard where Titan and Storm were running drills with a veteran in a wheelchair. Sage lay near a woman who hadn't spoken in weeks until now. James's voice rang out. "All right, everyone, formation. Let's show them what we're made of." The pack snapped into motion. They weren't just dogs anymore. They were healers, guardians, a mission reborn. 3 months ago, James Walker had been all but forgotten, buried under a crumbling factory floor, a shell of a soldier the city never knew it lost. Now, he stood before a crowd of reporters, city officials, and veterans at the grand opening of Second Chance Veterans and Canine Rehabilitation Center in East Detroit. The building behind him, once a forgotten warehouse, had been transformed freshly. Painted siding, wide-open training fields, renovated living quarters for veterans in transition. Inside, kennel doors had been replaced with glass partitions. Not to imprison, but to protect and connect. Atlas stood next to him in full working harness, his grizzled muzzle held high, golden eyes sharp. The other four, Shepherd's Titan, Storm, Hunter, and Sage flanked a group of veteran trainees, guiding, guarding, and grounding them in ways no human ever could. James took a deep breath. The microphones were live, the cameras rolling. I used to believe I was broken, he said. That what I came back with after the war was something no one could fix. But then came 5 dogs. Not just any dog-strained service animals who didn't just follow commands. They followed me home when the rest of the world left me behind. There wasn't a sound from the audience. And when I was dying underground, when I couldn't find my way out, he continued, they came back for me. They didn't forget. They didn't give up. They're the reason I'm alive. And now, because of them, hundreds of other veterans will get a second chance to. Applause erupted across the courtyard. But even as flashbulbs popped and the crowd rose to its feet, Maggie Reynolds stood in the back with her arms crossed. Eyes narrowed. Something still didn't sit right. After the ceremony, while James led donors on a tour through the facility's sensory training room, Maggie met with Dr. Eleanor Barnes and Frank in the admin office. I got another anonymous email, Maggie said, showing them her phone. Encrypted. Same sender as the one who leaked the dogfighting connections to Phillips. This one says, we've only scratched the surface. Dr. Barnes read the message carefully. Check property records on East Chandler. Warehouse 2 blocks from Phillips's apartment. Registered to a front business. Linked to storage unit number 423. Police never searched it. Frank grunted. What kind of front business? Maggie looked up. Security contracting. But it was dissolved 6 months ago. Could be nothing, Barnes said. Or it's something Phillips didn't want anyone to find, Maggie replied. Ann Thompson was terrified would be uncovered. They shared a long look. Then Maggie said what they were all thinking. Let's go take a look. The warehouse was padlocked, chain-wrapped double doors and a dusty alley entrance that hadn't been used in years, but Frank had a bolt cutter. A few careful snips later, they stepped inside. It smelled like stale oil and rust. Most of the space was empty, scattered crates, busted chairs, a broken desk in the corner. But along the far wall was a row of rented lockers, each marked with faded stenciled numbers 420, Maggie whispered, stopping in front of the unit. Frank picked the lock. The door creaked open. Inside were metal shelving units, military-style storage bins, and stacked against the back wall cages. Bloodstained, dented, scarred. Dr. Barnes pressed her hand to her mouth. Dear God, they found medical kits. Muzzles, weighted collars, one being contained, VHS tapes, dozens of them, unlabeled. Another was packed with dog files, health records, photos, scars logged like trophies. Maggie pulled out a folder labeled Titan. The first page read, Too passive. Won't initiate contact, refuses to engage, possibly damaged. Her stomach turned. Thompson knew, she said hoarsely. He knew what Phillips was doing. These weren't just dogs he bought. They were catalogued, tested, graded like equipment. Frank snapped photos of everything. This could blow the whole damn system open. They took the evidence straight to the Detroit Police Department. Internal Affairs promised to open a formal investigation. But Maggie had learned enough to know that promises didn't always mean action, so she called Tyler. Within 12 hours, he'd built a website, caninejustice.org. Photos, documents, testimonies, all live. Then they dropped the video. James sat in front of a plain, black backdrop with Atlas at his side. In one hand, he held the folder with Titan's name on it. In the other, a copy of a training manual from the VAS therapy dog program. He read from both, then looked directly into the camera. They tried to break these dogs, turn them into weapons, but they resisted. They stayed loyal. They chose compassion over conditioning. And now, we have a choice. To what kind of city do we want to be? One that buries the truth, or one that builds something better? The video exploded online. Justice for Titan trended within hours, City. Hall had no choice but to respond. The new interim mayor installed after Thompson's scandal issued a press release calling the revelations disturbing and unacceptable. He promised a full review of all city animal ordinances and funding pathways. More importantly, he met privately with Dr. Barnes and Maggie. "We want to fund your program permanently," he said. "Not just one location. We're talking statewide. Expansion, VA integration, community outreach." Maggie blinked. "You're serious?" "Your story captured the nation," the mayor said. "The therapy dogs. The shelter. The midnight rescue. It's a redemption arc America can believe in." But James wasn't interested in narratives. He sat across from the mayor and said one thing: "My dogs don't work for PR." The mayor smiled. "Neither do mine." 2 weeks later, a bill passed through City Council Walker Initiative legally protecting certified therapy dogs from euthanasia. Regardless of their prior ownership or trauma history, it also guaranteed funding for Second Chances expansion and created a new advisory board for veterans and animal specialists, and James. He was offered a full-time leadership position at the new center, with benefits, housing, and a training team. He accepted on one condition: that the dogs never be separated, ever again. If these dogs have earned your respect, hit that subscribe button for Brave Animals. We share the real stories that make us believe in loyalty, healing, and second chances. On a cold Tuesday morning, Maggie walked the halls of the new center with a cup of coffee and a smile she hadn't worn in years. Every room was full. Laughter echoed from the group therapy wing. Dogs trotted beside veterans down padded hallways lined with pictures of success stories. She stopped at one framed photo near the front. Entrance: 5 German Shepherds lined up on a frozen Detroit street, eyes locked on the camera. Beneath it, read: "They didn't run away, they ran back." She heard a bark and turned. Atlas stood in the doorway, tail wagging. James followed, holding a leash. "Group training starts in 5, he said. "Want to join? I wouldn't miss it." She fell in step beside him as the dogs led them down the corridor. One more mission. One more chance to save someone who thought they'd been forgotten. 6 months after the dogs first escaped their shelter cages and led Maggie to a dying man beneath a forgotten factory, Detroit had a new heartbeat. It didn't come from downtown development or campaign speeches. It came from the east side. From a former warehouse painted in soft blues and greens. From the rhythmic sounds of padded paws across therapy room floors. From the calm, grounded voices of veterans calling out commands to dogs that had once been marked for destruction. The Second Chance Veterans and Canine Rehabilitation Center wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Each morning, veterans lined up at the doors, some fresh from trauma, some still trying to find their footing in the civilian world, and waiting to meet them were 5 German Shepherds, heroes in their own right. Atlas still led the group, his silvered muzzle giving him the look of an old soul. He walked slowly now, but with unmistakable presence. Titan remained the enforcer, his broad chest a solid wall of support during balance and mobility sessions. Storm had become the center's explorer, guiding blind veterans through obstacle courses with gentle precision. Hunter never stopped scanning the first to detect distress or overstimulation, redirecting attention like a seasoned professional. And Sage, Sweet Sage, had become everyone's silent comfort. Her presence alone was enough to bring a room full of pain into quiet focus. Each had found a purpose again, and each had saved more lives than anyone would ever truly know. James Walker stood at the large bay window in the common room, coffee mug in hand, Atlas resting beside him. "Still surreal," he murmured. Maggie smiled from the nearby couch. "That they built this, or that you're not living in an underground hole anymore." James chuckled. Both. The transformation in him was just as remarkable as the center's. His shoulders were broader again, his gaze steady, his voice clear. The ghosts that once lived just behind his eyes still visited, but they no longer ruled him. He turned to Maggie. "You never told me why you kept showing up. You didn't even know me." "I knew them," she said, nodding to the dogs resting nearby. And they knew something I didn't. I figured if 5 shepherds were willing to dig through frozen dirt to get to someone, that person was worth saving. James's throat tightened. Guess they were right. The story had reached far beyond Detroit now. Veterans across the country were writing in, asking if the center accepted out-of-state referrals. Animal behaviorists requested tours. News crews came and went, but none of that changed how the center operated. It stayed personal, grounded. Real. Dr. Barnes had insisted on that from day one. This isn't a media machine, she said. It's a healing machine. One of the most powerful additions had been the buddy program pairing shelter dogs, often overlooked or mistreated, with veterans in early stages of recovery. The goal wasn't just training, it was rebuilding trust. Together, Maggie headed that program now, her name stitched on the sleeve of her uniform jacket, though she still swore she wasn't staff. Just a volunteer with keys and a little too much responsibility, she liked to joke. But everyone knew better. Without Maggie, there wouldn't have been a rescue. There wouldn't have been a recovery. There wouldn't have been a future. One evening in late fall, as orange leaves swirled across the parking lot, Maggie found James out by the memorial wall. He stood silently, hand resting on a bronze plaque that read, "In honor of those who kept going when everyone else stopped looking." Beneath it were etched 5 paw prints. He turned to her. "We should talk about the future." Maggie raised an eyebrow. "What's wrong with now?" "Nothing," James said. "But what happens when Atlas, when the others?" She nodded. They didn't talk about it much, but time marched on. The dogs were aging, slowing. Their bones creaked more. Their eyes dulled just a little. James continued, "We need to train the next generation. Keep the mission alive. I've already got 3 promising pairs in the buddy program," Maggie said, "one of them Benny and a pup named Willow are showing real progress. But it's not just about training dogs." "No," James agreed. "It's about training people to see dogs differently, as partners, as therapists, as family." The following weekend, the center held its first K9 graduation day. Families gathered in folding chairs. Beneath string lights hung between 2 oak trees. Veterans gave short speeches, many wiping tears as they talked about how their assigned dogs had helped them sleep, helped them reconnect with family, helped them live again. When it came time for the original 5 to be honored, James walked them one by one down the main aisle. Each wore a new vest with their name embroidered in gold. The crowd stood, and when James raised his hand and called "formation," the shepherds fell into place like a military honor guard. It was breathtaking. If this story has moved you, if these dogs reminded you what courage and loyalty really mean, please consider subscribing to Brave Animals. These stories don't just entertain, they honor. They inspire, they matter. Later that night, James sat on the back porch, a blanket over his legs. Atlas resting against him, as always. The other dogs lay nearby, chests rising and falling in rhythm, finally at peace. Maggie stepped out with 2 mugs of cocoa. "You did it," she said. "We did it." They sat in silence for a while, watching the moonrise. James broke it. "You know, they could have run off. They never would have." "No," he nodded. "They wouldn't, because they don't run. They return, every single time." He looked down at Atlas. The dog's eyes opened and met his. No fear, no doubt, just steady love. James's voice caught in his throat. "They stayed. When the world didn't. When I couldn't even stay. For myself, they stayed." Maggie squeezed his hand. "Because you never stopped being worth it. Thank you for following the story of the dogs that dug at midnight. These weren't just rescue dogs, they were rescuers. They were healers, they were a team. Proving that even when the world forgets you, even when the system fails, there is still hope, there is still purpose, and there is still love." Now we want to hear from you. Do you believe dogs can sense when someone is suffering even before humans can? Share your thoughts, stories, or experiences in the comments below. We'd love to feature some of your stories in future episodes of Brave Animals. Until next time, stay brave, stay kind, And never underestimate the loyalty of a dog who believes in you.